Alrighty, shall we move on to the LessWrong posts?
Yeah, let's.
Feels really weird doing the LessWrong posts without Jess here.
We can skip them and talk about other stuff, or we can knock them out really quick. It's up to you.
We should do them.
All right, we'll trudge on, and we'll acknowledge up front that these won't be as much fun without her.
Yeah.
So we had 3 posts this week, or this episode rather, because they were kind of short, and I felt like they kind of tied into each other. Let's see. So the first one was knowing about biases can hurt people, and my one sentence read on this is like basically if all you have is the knowledge that biases exist and how to identify them, it doesn't. It can be a double-edged sword, where you and he. I think he uses the word sophisticated arguer here. This is like somebody knows.
Let's not do the sophisticated arguer yet.
All right, that's fine.
Okay.
But this is kind of like akin to like knowing logical fallacies, but not practicing not using them.
Yeah.
Right. So you can point out slippery slopes and false dichotomies with your opponents, but like you're not paying attention to your own words.
Right.
That can happen with biases too.
Yeah. You always apply them to other people and be like, oh, this is where you're doing wrong, and you don't look at your own arguments the same way.
Yeah.
Which just makes you get more and more entrenched in the viewpoint you already hold.
Especially if like if you never really accept the fact that like you're doing that, and then you find yourself winning all these arguments, and you're like, I must be right. It can be definitely a vicious feedback cycle.
Yeah.
It starts off with a fun little story of, once upon a time, I tried to tell my mother about the problem of expert calibration, saying, quote, so when an expert says they're 99% confident, it only happens about 70% of the time, unquote. Then there was a pause, as suddenly I realized I was speaking to my mother, and I hastily added, of course you've got to make sure to apply that skepticism even-handedly, including to yourself, rather than just using it to argue against anything you disagree with. And, as my mother said, are you kidding? I use this all the time. It's great. So it's a lesson in knowing that these are tools that, if used properly, will work both ways. You can't just use them to rip other people's things apart. But to dive into the actual content of the post, we can do that.
And he had a really interesting thing that he said too. Do you think you are helping these people who are sophisticated in this way? Do you think you're making them more effective rationalists if you just gave them these lists of biases? And I was like, wow, I hate ever being in a position of saying that more knowledge makes people worse off, right? So I don't want to say that, but it sounds almost like,
in this case, it is.
It's not, yeah.
And it does run against that grain of like, why should knowledge hurt? But this is knowledge that's...
If you just gave them that, you're not making them a more effective rationalist. You're making them more effective at fooling themselves, which is the opposite of what we want.
Right, because for some reason, I'm not a car person, but all my analogies involve cars. If I taught you how the go pedal works and not the brake, are you a better driver than you were before?
Right.
Or probably not, right? I mean, I guess a little. You can do one thing with the car. Are you a safer driver? Absolutely not. You're a safer driver knowing nothing about how the car works than you are just knowing how to hit the gas pedal, right? So that's actually not the worst analogy in the world, and I even tied it to cars.
What is it with you and cars, man?
I don't know.
Are you sure you're not a car nerd?
Pretty sure.
Do you have like a broken down car you're working on every weekend?
I've had lots of broken cars. I think it's more just like they're really simple and they do lots of little things, and I can usually find a way to pigeonhole an analogy into them. But yeah, so he gives off, I don't know, well, we'll burn through them really quick. Tabor and Lodge.
Let's not go through all of them.
All right, cool. Yeah. There are, 6, whatever. I thought there were...
Unless you want to burn through them. Go ahead then.
We'll just jump
cut
through.
Out me being a dick.
No, you're totally fine. We'll run through really quick. There's Tabor and Lodge's motivated skepticism in the evaluation of political beliefs. The confirmation of 6 predictions. There's the prior attitude effect, where subjects who feel strongly about an issue, even when encouraged to be objective, will evaluate supportive arguments more favorably than contrary arguments. Number 2, disconfirmation bias. Subjects will spend more time and cognitive resources denigrating contrary arguments than supporting ones. Number 3, confirmation bias. Subjects free to choose their information sources will seek out supportive rather than contrary sources. 4, attitude polarization. Exposing subjects to an apparently balanced set of pro and con arguments will exaggerate their initial position, or their initial polarization. Number 5, attitude strength effect. Subjects voicing stronger attitudes will be more prone to the above biases. And number 6, the sophistication effect. Politically knowledgeable subjects, because they possess a greater ammunition in which to counter-argue incongruent facts and arguments, will be more prone to the above biases. I felt like this was worth going into because everyone's heard of many of these, like confirmation bias, probably attitude polarization. But the main thing is that there's the effect that if you're just aware of the first 5, those are great tools to use to rip other people apart. But this is where it introduces the sophisticated arguer. But yeah, also I thought that it was interesting because I was tripped up briefly on prior attitude effect versus confirmation bias. which are different. So,
And he pointed out that even telling people about this isn't necessarily enough. He says that he told someone about the sophisticated arguer effect, where if you know all these biases, they will tend to use them just to promote their own position. And next time that Eliezer said something that the person didn't like, he accused Eliezer of being a sophisticated arguer. Didn't try to point out any particular sophisticated argument or any particular flaw, just shook his head and said that what was it? I was apparently using my own intelligence to defeat itself. So he basically had just gotten yet another fully general counter-argument.
which I don't think we've discussed that topic before, and yet it was a hyperlink in the post. So somehow we missed it.
It wasn't a hyperlink.
It was, I think. Oh, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Why am I tripping up here? Oh,
I
okay.
think it's something that was already being discussed, like in comments and such.
So I
or
guess-
possibly other bloggers, fully general counter-arguments, so they had it all in caps as the, thing that's actually already known in the community, but there was never a post about it.
I somehow read it this afternoon and thought there was, so I'm crazy. So I guess we didn't discuss fully general counterarguments because we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But the gist is that it's this like one thing you can wave that's like, nope, conversation stopper, I'm done.
Yeah.
Which like
I generally run into, there's children dying in Africa or in China or whatever. That thing you're doing right now doesn't matter. It's like, okay.
or running with our anti-theism run from a little earlier, like the God works in mysterious ways to answer any and all, like, why is God killing poor babies?
Right.
It's like, well, he works in mysterious ways.
How could you possibly know the mind of God?
Yeah.
He has his reasons that you puny humans cannot comprehend.
And to say that, like, God, again, not necessarily picking on theism, but to run with that example, not necessarily not picking on theism, but
Okay.
to run with that example, like, the comeback God works in mysterious ways isn't an argument. It's not even really a position. It's like it's just this is my stop to your argument, and nothing you can say will change the fact that God works in mysterious ways, right? So basically it's a tool you can use to like quote win any argument, but not in a way that like makes either of you better off for having had the argument. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So he says, even the notion of a sophisticated arguer can be deadly if it leaps all too readily to the mind when you encounter a seemingly intelligent person who says something you don't like. And I thought that was almost depressing in a way, that even that is misused.
You know, I remember reading when I first read this that like this might come up in real like rationalist life if I had conversations with rationalists and stuff. I don't think I've ever been accused of being a sophisticated arguer, which might be a good sign that I'm not a sophisticated arguer, in the pejorative sense.
Right.
Or it could mean that my friends aren't sufficiently rational to point out when I am being one.
Okay.
But it's the kind of thing that in a conversation between two people with the right training, if we were discussing, I don't know, somebody's position on something, and I'd be like, are you sure that's not, sophisticated argumentation?
Mm-hmm.
You would idealistically pause and say, oh, maybe it is.
Right.
And so it's
don't-
another thing to be aware of when you're introspecting.
But the thing is, like, no one has the motivation to investigate all claims as rigorously as they would investigate something like your mother is a pedophile, right? That would be something where I would be like, no, she's not. Allow me to prove it to you. And there's, people feel that way about the things they really care about, but no one, gonna go and investigate the opposite position because they just don't have the passion and the energy for it. I think this is one of these places where it's better to have a variety of views on things and get people who believe differently both investigating something.
You mean
fact,
like you couldn't be an impartial investigator if someone raised this charge seriously?
No, I just mean you cannot be this impartial. We're not perfect Bayesian machines, right? We already have our passions and our things we care about and limits to our time and our energy and our motivation. So I think the best thing to do if you want to, and now that I say this, I'm sorry, my head's running out of my mouth. I was going to say the best thing you want to do when you want to investigate something is to get two people who are both really interested in the subject but in opposite directions and both look into it at the same time and present their viewpoints to each other or to an interested third party. And then that reminded me that, that's the thing that Scott Alexander is doing with his adversarial collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's catching on a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, that's the reason why you want to have debates and such, right? Because you're all into looking up the stuff that supports your position, and you need someone else who has the same sort of passion to look into stuff that is against your position, so that you at least have the all the available data in front of you instead of just the stuff that you had the time and the inclination to find.
Does that tie into to the sophisticated arguer?
I
Like, that just sounds like a good lesson in like being aware that you might be too invested in something.
yeah. I don't know that.
I might be missing something.
I think the sophisticated arguer would be someone who would dismiss the other side quickly.
Or yeah, they would use all of their sophisticated arguments to point out why the other side's stupid, but not really defeat it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Or even say to the other side, you are blinding yourself with your own sophisticated arguments instead of actually accepting my position.
Yeah. I think maybe choosing an emotionally charged example is, I don't know. Now I'm kind of wondering if I don't sufficiently care about things. Because, like, if someone told me that, I'd be like, wait, really? Why do you think that? And my response, depending on who they were and where this came from, but, like, if you told me that my mom was a pedophile, I'd be like, why the hell would you say that? Like,
Yeah.
what do you know that I don't know?
Right.
And if she's not, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But if you had really compelling evidence, I'd kind of want to know.
Right.
So, like, that reminds this. All right, this is a sidebar, but we're in the end game now. So
Yeah.
remember we had the conversation way back in the day with Katrina about like whether or not you can harm somebody who's dead.
Yeah.
And you and I are both kind of running with the Aristotelian like virtue of like, sure, you can destroy the reputation or something.
Yeah.
What I wish I had asked her was like, if say you died and I put a bunch of meat in your fridge and a bunch of child porn on your computer, would I not have harmed you?
Yeah.
So like in the technical sense, no, because she's dead.
Yeah.
But in like the other sense, it's like all the good that you've done in the world is now destroyed by the fact that like I've created this convincing fraud this convincing framework that like you're this fraud who ate meat this whole time and never believed your virtues. Oh, and you had kiddie porn on your computer.
Yeah.
So like
So that book I raved about a couple episodes ago, the Monster Baru Cormorant.
hold on, can you say that a little slower? Because when I plugged that in the last episode, I had to ask you what it was because I couldn't understand what you said.
Okay, the book was The Monster Baru Cormorant. Her name is Baru. First name is Baru, last name is Cormorant.
Okay, so that's why I couldn't like Google it because they weren't words.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, cormorant is actually a word. It's a type of bird.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
Last name is after bird. Anyways, but yeah, in the book, there's a character that makes the point that it can't be that things don't matter anymore after someone is dead because we all die, and so that means that nothing matters.
That's
So
arguing from the bottom, but I like it.
yeah. Things have to matter even after you're dead.
The what I thought you were going to say, and this is the other side of that coin, is that like things have to matter after they're dead because we care about dead people.
Yeah, that's
And we
it.
care about the impact that they had. Like Martin Luther King didn't stop being important the day he was shot, right? So your posthumous impact matters. And don't get me wrong, this was not a dig on Katrina. The reason I was thinking about this recently was I can't remember what brought it up. Something about that like can you harm dead people came back to mind just a few weeks ago, and it's not like I thought I had this great gotcha. It's like I wish I had asked her that because I wonder if that would have illustrated my point better. Anyway, so wrapping this one up, this post. The literature on bias is mostly cognitive psychology for cognitive psychology's sake. I had to give my audience their dire warnings during that one lecture, or they would probably not hear them at all. And I don't think we talked about it. That lecture he's talking about is that when he became of the sophisticated arguer bias, that now he teaches that in the initial talk. That's always part of the first exposure.
Yeah.
And I guess he could leave the room before he gets there, but you're not going to get any good weapons. You're going to get vague things like population insensitivity or something as an example of a bad heuristic. And then, but yeah, so being aware of the sophisticated arguer trap is important for a good rationalist. I don't know, kind of like the analogy to rationality in martial arts is hit so many times and so acute that like it's worth it comes to mind easily, right? This might be like using a headbutt to strike somebody. Like if you hit them right, it hurts them a lot, but it hurts you too, but you might not notice it. Maybe is that too tortured of an analogy?
I would say like you probably want to teach someone how to fall early on in martial arts, and if you don't, they're going to hurt themselves a lot practicing it.
That's a good way to think of it too. Yeah, and I guess just to be aware that like some moves can damage you too if you're not careful about them. Maybe. Yeah. All right. Maybe it's not a smooth analogy with that particular one. Post 2: Debiasing as non-self-destruction. So this starts with a quote from Nick Bostrom. Quote.
A question from Nick Bostrom.
Quote/question. It's in quotes.
Okay.
It's a question from Nick Bostrom. What practical things does debiasing enable us to do other than refraining from buying lottery tickets? That's the fair question from the outside, right?
I mean, we've asked basically that same question using becoming rationalists as instead of debiasing a number of times on this podcast.
Yeah, that's a good point. And debiasing isn't sufficient to become a rationalist, but
No.
it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Yudkowsky says that it seems to me that how to be smart varies wildly between professions. Yet such concepts as willing to admit you lost, or policy debates should not appear one-sided, or plan to overcome your flaws instead of just confessing them, seem like they could all apply to many professions. All of this is advice not so much about how to be extraordinarily clever as rather how not to be stupid, which I think is something that we hit on before when trying to answer the question of somebody like what's something you do rationally in daily life. Like it's not so much like I do these 5 things every day. It's more like I just try not to suck and I try to use these tools.
And it's so familiar. I almost think that we must. Did we quote this post before? Was this just something we had on our minds because we've read it?
I think I informally quoted it, not verbatim, during that conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, because I used the example of like, and maybe that's in this post or not, but it's not in the quotes that we pulled out. Like, not sucking at being a janitor and not sucking at being a lawyer are probably have a lot in common. But being great at both of those professions have like very little in common. Yeah. So there's the base level art of just like not sucking at what you're doing. That tends to be pretty consistent across lots of things. And I mean, it's just like, I don't know, if you've had lots of jobs and you've had lots of coworkers and you've had good and bad ones, a lot of the bad ones will have a lot of the same habits as a lot of the other bad ones, right? But the good ones could be good in different ways. I mean, the bad ones will be the ones that, whatever, don't show up to work or are mean or something like that, right? So
not showing up is a pretty big deal.
It's a pretty big one, and it's a good sign that you suck at your job. Yeah. So
debiasing is mostly not about how to be extraordinarily clever, but about how to not be stupid. Its great successes are disasters that do not materialize, defeats that never happen, mistakes that no one sees because they are not made. Often you can't even be sure that something would have gone wrong if you had not tried to debias yourself. You don't always see the bullet that doesn't hit you.
That's the quote that always stuck with me. Because it also sucks, and he goes on to point out that, like, because that makes shitty evidence, right?
Yeah.
It's like, remember all those times I didn't get killed?
Right.
I don't know, man, running back to driving. It's like, if you're a good driver, you might not even notice all the times that you don't kill yourself when you're driving, right? Mm-hmm. You'll notice some of the close calls if you do screw up, and if you're like, I was texting and then, oh shit, that car came out faster than I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
And it's your reaction and your skill as a good driver that lets you notice and then not have that happen. But that's not like, that's a victory because it's not a loss, right? But it's not like I won at not crashing, unless the game you're playing is not crashing. You see what I mean? It's like an inversion of winning in the sense of not losing, which I'm just hitting home because that really struck well with me as that's a very basic thing, right?
And I remember the writer who wrote in, or the commenter who wrote into us once. He lived, I forget which country it was, but it was one of the developing nations, and he said how often he saw people doing simple, somewhat self-destructive things that if they had just known some rationalism, it would have made a difference. And if the entire community had known that, it would have been a huge level up to the whole community to not make those errors. And it's just things like that you don't see.
Yeah.
Especially when your entire community is already practicing it.
We're going to have Jess talk about her time in the Bay Area and visiting. I'm not sure exactly where she's staying or if she's in a hub where people are all doing this. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious what a small microcosm of society would look like if they're all doing all the things right and they're all not losing if they're all missing all the easy bullets, or the easily dodgeable bullets. I mean, I imagine, for example, electricity bill never not gets paid, right? Sure. But I'm kind of curious if there are victories. If everyone's together and doing this, what are the awesome things that are happening? So that'd be curious to see. And if Jess can't do it, we'll get somebody from Reach who can, or we'll try. So, yeah, I mean, the great victories, and this is more on the point I was making, the great victories of debiasing are exactly the lottery tickets we didn't buy, the hopes and dreams we kept in the real world instead of diverting them into infinitesimal probabilities. The triumphs of debiasing are cults not joined, optimistic assumptions rejected during planning, time not wasted on blind alleys. It's the art of non-self-destruction. And, I mean, this is actually kind of funny because he mentions the... cults not rejected and stuff.
Or cults not joined.
That's right. Excuse me. Not joined. Only don't reject one cult. This one. When I was a kid, probably up until my early teenage years, I was convinced that all right, here's what I'm going to do and how I'm going to win at life. I'm going to find a magical artifact. All these stories have to come from somewhere. Okay. As a kid, I didn't think that it was all wishful thinking.
Right.
I assumed that it was all rooted somewhere. I'm going to find that magic amulet or the magic ring or something, and I'm going to get these powers. And I mean, how dumb would my life have turned out if I didn't shake that off after a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Like if all of my like working to like get enough money was so I could go, whatever, dig in Egyptian pyramids or something to go try and find a magic trinket.
Maybe
like,
you'd be a faith healer right now, man, raking in the money.
or maybe I'd be a real magic person, not just
Right.
a faith healer, right?
Oh, well, okay.
Oh yeah. There's the shyster art of like pretend faith healing, where
Yeah.
I'll pull out your cancerous tumor with sleight of hand. But yeah, if I could do something, but yeah, but the thing is, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
So it was just funny because I wonder if I'd read this as a kid, what I would have thought. As a kid, to give my younger self exactly as little credit as he deserves, I think I would have thought, sure, but this one's different, right? This pyramid scheme's real,
Right. It's got an actual pyramid, man.
Exactly. Fact is, most people. Oh, this is back to the post. The fact is, most people who take a half-hearted potshot at debiasing themselves, don't get a huge amount of mileage out of it. This is one of those things you have to work at for quite a while before you get good at it, especially since there's currently no source of systematic training or even a decent manual. The sequences end up being a decent manual to get started, but he's writing it right now, so
Yeah.
in this time. And this is a quote, or this is a link to the 10 Virtues of Rationality post that we should actually just do for one of our sequence posts.
Yeah.
So this was all hyperlink this next sentence. If for many years you practice the techniques and submit yourself to strict constraints, it may be that you will glimpse the center. But until then, mistakes avoided are just replaced by other mistakes. It takes time for your minds to become significantly quieter. Indeed, a little knowledge of cognitive biases often hurts. That quote got cut off. Is often harmful, I'm assuming, is what I was going to say.
I think it was a link back to the prior post.
Yeah.
Do you want to stop there? I kind of don't want to do the third one because I'm not sure it's as related and I'm sort of burnt.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
We've got one bullet point, then I'll hit it. And
Sure.
we'll call it
Yeah,
good.
sorry.
No, you're totally fine. I appreciate it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So the last thing on here is that as for public proof of like that this does anything, that rationality is useful, he says, I can see at least 3 ways that it could come about. First, there might be founded an order of basecraft for people who are serious about it, and graduates of these dojos might prove systematically more successful even after controlling for measures of fluid intelligence. Second, you could wait for some individual or group working on important specific or domain-specific problem, but also known for their commitment to debiasing to produce a spectacularly huge success, public success. Third, there might be found techniques that can be taught easily and have readily measurable results. And then a simple controlled experiment could serve as public proof, at least for those who attends to science. As far as these go, I think CFAR is kind of doing the third.
Mm-hmm.
And the first two, I've heard people in our local community who are trying to do something kind of like that, where they want to, and it's not necessarily committing to it's more, I guess, the first one of saying, look, I'm successful here and here and here because of my rationality training, and these are all the stupid mistakes I didn't make.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're in the process now of trying to refine something like that that's presentable to people.
Oh, cool.
So these things are still happening. I'm sure there's way more happening outside of the Denver area that, I wonder what people, like I said, in the Bay Area or at CFAR and all them are up to.
That's where all the big names are.
Yeah, that's where all the big names are. And yet, I'm pretty sure if we had this great breakthrough at some point, we might have heard word about it here yet, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think they're still working on it, but granted, this was written 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Some things take a while. So
Yeah. Well, and 10 years ago, there was really no one yet. I mean, there was a few posters on overcomingbias.com,
right,
which later turned into LessWrong, but not yet at this point even.
yeah, that's fair. And I mean, I guess the other thing too is I guess I'm just kind of heading off the rejoinder of well, why hasn't this produced anything like this yet? Because this is untreaded water in social science.
And I mean,
if you had told me, hey, it's been 2 years, I've made a breathtaking discovery in a new area of social science, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm kind of suspicious, right? And there have been steps. There have been very positive motions and, like I said, movements working on these things. But
and it's not like there hasn't been success. There
Yeah.
has been a huge amount of public interest in finally addressing friendly AI due, in large part due to the work of Eliezer and the early rationalists, Nick Bostrom, of course. The AI movement was kicked off by these people, and there is a large supportive community in the Bay Area that a lot of these people can live meaningful lives in now. I mean, I would consider all three of those to be pretty big successes too.
yeah, and I mean, we've heard from other non-Bay Area based rationality groups that have report similar, meaning and friends and communities. So yeah, these things are happening. I think just as far as why isn't there a manual yet, 8 quick steps to not sucking at life.
Because there's
first
no
of all,
such thing.
yeah, first of all, there might not be 8 quick steps, but B, I'm sure there's 100 books with that title, and C, the community's only been at this for a little over a decade. I strongly suspect, I'm very confident that things like this will be coming out, but so far as I know, nothing has been published today that is a guaranteed manual. So cognitive science and like social sciences are hard, and that's the downside. It's like anyone who knows anything about like treating depression or dealing with a mental disorder or mental illness or whatever, like what worked for one patient doesn't necessarily work for another. And so part of like working with the person is figuring out what approach they need because of what specifically we need to work on. So like it's not what I am also strongly confident in it is that this isn't going to be a set of steps that works for 90% of people, right? This is going to be the kinds of things that, all right, cool, well, we found that 90% of people who do all 100 of these things tend to do really well. Maybe you only need a dozen, So anyway, it has run on quite a bit, and we did we did have a third one we were going to do, but frankly, it's kind of mathy and boring.
I thought, well,
It
yeah.
He dives into more math than I think is strictly necessary, but it's not like maybe I'm just math averse.
Okay.
But it's just it's on inductive bias, which we will actually I think save for next time because it's been a while. So
for next time, our LessWrong post will be inductive bias and futuristic predictions as consumable goods.